When two of Hollywood's most unconventional talents collide, the world watches. And when that collision happens on a film set in 1999, between a seasoned actor with Oscar credentials and a rising starlet with raw intensity, sparks don't just fly. They ignite an inferno that would burn brightly for exactly 3 years before extinguishing in a way that defied the typical celebrity breakup narrative. This is the story of Billy Bob Thornton and Angelina Jolie, a story that, even after 2 decades, continues to captivate audiences not because of scandal or betrayal, but because of something far more human and relatable. Two people realizing that love, no matter how genuine, sometimes simply cannot bridge the fundamental differences between how two people choose to live their lives. For years, the public speculation surrounding their divorce has been rife with theories. Was there infidelity? Did egos clash beyond repair? Were the infamous blood necklaces a sign of something darker beneath the surface? But recently, Thornton, now in his 70s and reflecting on a life filled with 6 marriages, has provided candid answers to questions that have lingered in the Hollywood gossip mill for 20 years. And his explanation is neither scandalous nor surprising. It's simply honest. To understand why their relationship ended, we must first understand how it began. The year was 1999, and the film was Pushing Tin, a comedy drama about competitive air traffic controllers. Billy Bob Thornton was already an established presence in Hollywood. He had won an Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay for Sling Blade, a film he also starred in and directed. He carried the gravitas of someone who had already proven himself as a multifaceted talent, an actor, writer, and filmmaker with a distinctive vision and the credentials to back it up. Angelina Jolie, conversely, was in that fascinating position between rising star and established talent. She had already made memorable appearances in films like Cyborg 2 and Hackers, but she was still climbing the ladder, still finding her footing in an industry that demanded perfection from women while simultaneously trying to box them into narrow categories. She was young, ambitious, and radiating that electric energy that only comes from someone on the precipice of something bigger. When they met on the set of Pushing Tin, the chemistry was immediate and undeniable. But according to insiders and both parties' own accounts, it wasn't a typical love-at-first-sight scenario. Instead, it was something more subtle but infinitely more powerful: mutual recognition. These were two people who understood each other without needing to speak, who recognized in one another a kindred spirit, someone willing to exist on the edge, both professionally and personally. Within a year of meeting, they had made a decision that shocked absolutely no one who knew them. They eloped to Las Vegas. It was bold, it was impulsive, and it was entirely consistent with who they were as individuals. There was no grand proposal, no paparazzi photos of an engagement ring, no months of wedding planning. They simply decided that they wanted to be married, and they made it happen with the kind of spontaneity that defined their entire relationship. Almost immediately after their marriage became public, the media latched onto one particular detail that would become the defining visual symbol of their relationship: the blood necklaces. These small lockets, rumored to contain drops of each other's blood, became the subject of fascination, horror, and endless speculation. Tabloids painted them as vampires, as gothic romantics living in some kind of darkened fantasy, as people who had crossed the line from eccentric into genuinely disturbing. But the reality, as Thornton would later explain, was far more innocent and infinitely more touching. The blood necklaces were not some dramatic horror show statement. They were tiny lockets holding single drops of blood, a physical manifestation of wanting to carry a piece of each other when life got busy. It was their way of staying connected, a sentimental gesture that said, "I carry you with me, even when we're apart." This detail became crucial to understanding their relationship because it revealed something fundamental about how Thornton and Jolie operated. They live in their own world with their own rules, their own language, and their own symbols. They didn't care particularly about what the outside world thought. They were artists, eccentric by nature, and they celebrated that eccentricity together rather than trying to hide it. During their first year of marriage, they continued to captivate audiences with their unpredictability. They made public appearances together, gave interviews, and navigated their careers while managing the intensity of their personal connection. Friends and insiders consistently describe this period as one filled with genuine affection, playfulness, and a kind of fearlessness that's rare to witness between two people in the public eye. They would cook together, laugh at the absurdity of the media circus surrounding them, and find comfort in the fact that they had each other in a world that could often feel isolating. Behind closed doors, they were just two people trying to make their unconventional relationship work in the most conventional sense, with love, commitment, and a willingness to navigate challenges together. But even in the most passionate relationships, cracks can develop. And in the case of Thornton and Jolie, the cracks didn't come from a single traumatic event or a third party. They came from the slow, inevitable realization that their life goals were fundamentally misaligned. Angelina Jolie was building something bigger than Hollywood. Even during their marriage, she was beginning to develop her humanitarian vision. She was thinking globally, moving constantly, taking on projects that would expand her reach beyond the film industry. She was ambitious in a way that demanded constant movement, constant growth, and constant engagement with the wider world. Her energy was directional and outward-facing. Billy Bob Thornton, for all his talent and success, was wired differently. He preferred stability. He liked home. He enjoyed the quieter rhythms of life, time with loved ones, creative pursuits that didn't require constant public engagement, a more grounded and less peripatetic existence. He was content to work steadily in Hollywood without needing to conquer every frontier. His energy was more inward-focused, more domestic, more about building a stable life. These aren't character flaws in either direction. They are simply different temperaments, different life philosophies, different visions for what a fulfilling life looks like. And as their marriage progressed, these differences became increasingly difficult to navigate. Thornton has described his lifestyle as inherently agoraphobic, not in the clinical sense, necessarily, but in his preference for home, for controlled environments, for a life where he could limit his exposure to the chaos that Jolie thrived within. Meanwhile, Jolie's lifestyle was increasingly global, increasingly demanding, increasingly oriented toward experiences and causes that required her to be everywhere at once. By 2003, just 3 years into their marriage, Thornton and Jolie came to a realization that, while heartbreaking in its own right, was also profoundly mature. Love alone was not enough. Their passion for each other remained genuine, but their life paths had begun to diverge in ways that couldn't be reconciled without significant sacrifice from one or both parties. This is where their story diverges from the typical celebrity divorce narrative. There was no public mudslinging, no leaked recordings, no accusations of infidelity or cruelty. Instead, there was understanding, there was recognition, and there was a decision made with civility and respect. Thornton has repeatedly described the split as civilized and emphasized that they remained very, very close friends after the divorce. This wasn't a PR spin. Multiple accounts from people close to both parties corroborate this characterization. They genuinely cared about each other, genuinely respected each other, and genuinely wanted the best for each other moving forward, even as they acknowledged that their paths could no longer run parallel. What made this divorce remarkable was not what it was, but what it wasn't. It wasn't ugly. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't defined by lawyers fighting over assets or custody arrangements. It was, instead, a conscious choice by two adults to prioritize their individual fulfillment over maintaining a relationship that had become increasingly difficult to sustain. Once they separated, Thornton and Jolie embarked on radically different trajectories that would, in hindsight, validate their decision to part ways. For Thornton, the period following his split from Jolie marked a transition into a more grounded phase of life. He continued to work steadily in Hollywood, taking on roles that interested him, avoiding the trap of chasing blockbuster success at any cost. More importantly, he began building the stable family life he had always craved. By 2014, he married Connie Angland, a woman he had been with for many years prior. Together, they have a daughter, Bella, now in her 20s. Combined with his 3 other children from previous relationships, Thornton became the kind of father and family man he had wanted to be all along. He has spoken openly about his earlier marriages, including the one to Jolie, with a kind of wry acceptance. He jokes about the impulsive decisions that led to some of his marriages, but there's no bitterness in his humor, just self-awareness. He has found contentment in a life that allows him to pursue his creative interests while maintaining the stability and family connections that matter most to him. He released music, continued to act in films that resonated with him, and built a private life that, while not entirely away from the public eye, was significantly more grounded and intentional than the chaos of his early career. Angelina Jolie, meanwhile, took her restlessness and channeled it into something that would eventually define her legacy far more than her marriage to Billy Bob Thornton ever could. She threw herself into humanitarian work with single-minded determination. She traveled extensively, raising awareness for refugees and displaced families. She eventually became a special envoy for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, a role that allowed her to merge her global ambitions with meaningful, lasting work. Simultaneously, she continued to build a stellar acting career. Her performances in films like Changeling and A Mighty Heart earned critical acclaim and demonstrated her range as an actress willing to take on challenging, complex roles. She eventually entered into a relationship with Brad Pitt, and together they built a blended family of 6 children through adoption and biological means. A family that, despite the eventual difficulties in their relationship, represented her commitment to expanding her capacity to love and nurture on a global scale. Now, 2 decades after their divorce, Thornton's reflections on his marriage to Jolie are tinged with nostalgia, wisdom, and a clear-eyed understanding of why it ended and why it had to end. He doesn't speak about Jolie with regret or resentment. Instead, he speaks about that period of his life as one of genuine joy, authentic connection, and meaningful growth, even though it was ultimately unsustainable. This perspective is remarkably healthy and mature. In an industry where former partners often become bitter rivals or completely erase each other from their narratives, Thornton has consistently acknowledged both the reality and the value of what he and Jolie shared. He has not, in other words, tried to rewrite history to make himself look better or to minimize the significance of their relationship. The blood necklaces, the Las Vegas elopement, the eccentricities that dominated tabloid headlines, these are not things Thornton has tried to distance himself from or retroactively reframe as mistakes. Instead, he presents them as what they were, expressions of genuine love between 2 unconventional people who are willing to be themselves with each other. What makes the Thornton-Jolie story compelling even after 2 decades is that it tells us something important about relationships and human nature. It reminds us that not every divorce is the result of betrayal or failure. Sometimes, relationships end not because they were built on false foundations, but because the foundations, while genuine, simply couldn't support 2 people who were moving in different directions. Their story is a counter-narrative to the celebrity divorce narrative that dominates tabloids and entertainment news. We are not accustomed to hearing about celebrity breakups that are characterized by mutual respect, continued friendship, and a recognition that the separation was necessary for both parties to thrive. Yet this is